They stripped her of everything the night she turned 18, and no wolf rose inside her. The gathering hall of Ashwood Ridge Pack fell silent as Elara Thorne stood on the granite dais barefoot, her breath forming small clouds in the cold Montana air. 200 wolves surrounded her in a perfect circle, their eyes reflecting the firelight like coins at the bottom of a well. Watching, waiting, judging. Her father stood 3 paces away. Alpha Gregor Thorne was a large man, not tall but broad, with the thick neck and heavy brow of a brawler who had earned his position through violence and maintained it through fear. His hair was iron gray cut close to his skull, and his eyes were the same deep brown as Elara's, a genetic echo she had always hated, because it meant she carried a piece of him inside her, written into her cells like a curse she could not escape. He held her mother's locket in his closed fist. The bronze gleamed between his knuckles, catching the firelight. It was a small thing, no bigger than a silver dollar, engraved with a pattern of leaves and vines that Elara had traced with her fingertips 10,000 times over 7 years. Inside was a lock of hair, auburn threaded with silver, and an inscription on the interior clasp that her mother had shown her the night before she died. "You are the moon even when they cannot see you." Elara's chest felt hollow. She wanted to reach for the locket, wanted to beg for it back, but her hands stayed at her sides because she had learned years ago that begging only made things worse. Gregor fed on weakness, the way other wolves fed on meat, and she would not give him the satisfaction. 18 years, Gregor said. His voice carried across the hall, deep and resonant, pitched for maximum impact. He was performing now, playing to the crowd. 18 years I have waited for my daughter to prove herself worthy of this pack. 18 years of excuses, of delay, of hoping that the moon goddess might correct her mistake. The pack shifted. Elara heard the whisper of fabric, the creak of leather, the small involuntary sounds of 200 bodies responding to an alpha's authority. Tonight was her last chance, Gregor continued, the rite of awakening. The moment when every wolf of age calls forth their beast and claims their place in the pack. He opened his fist. The locket dangled from its broken chain, spinning slowly. She has no wolf. The words fell like stones into still water. Ripples of shock, disgust, and something darker moved through the assembled pack. Elara felt them land on her skin, each judgment a small cut. No wolf, Gregor repeated louder now. No beast, no bond. She is human in all but blood, a defect, a biological failure, and I will not allow the weakness of my line to poison this pack any further. He dropped the locket. It hit the granite with a small, bright sound, a chime that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Elara's eyes tracked it as it bounced once, twice, settled into a small groove in the stone. Then Gregor lifted his boot and brought it down. The bronze crumpled. Elara heard it fold in on itself, metal compressing under 600 pounds of force and fury. The chain snapped, the clasp shattered, and inside she knew without seeing her mother's hair scattered into dust. Something broke inside her chest. Not her heart that had learned to protect itself years ago, but something smaller and more essential. The last fragile belief that her father might, despite everything, still see her as his daughter. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears were a currency she could not afford. "Elara Thorne," Gregor said, and his voice was flat, now emptied of performance, just a man stating a fact. "You are no daughter of mine. You are no member of this pack. By my authority as Alpha of Ashwood Ridge, I declare you exile. You have until dawn to cross our borders. If you return, you will be killed as a trespasser." The pack howled. It started with the wolves nearest the dais and spread outward like a shockwave. 200 voices rising in agreement, in affirmation, in the primal joy of watching something weak be cast out so the strong could remain pure. The sound battered against Elara's eardrums, pressed against her chest, tried to force her to her knees. She stood. Her legs shook. Her hands were numb. But she stood, and she looked at her father, and she memorized the exact shape of his face in this moment, because she knew she would need to remember it later, would need to hold it in her mind as proof that this had really happened. Gregor met her eyes. For just a second, something flickered in his expression. Uncertainty, perhaps, or regret. But then it was gone, replaced by the cold dismissal of a man who had made his decision and would not be moved. Elara turned. She walked across the dais, down the 3 stone steps, through the corridor of wolves that opened before her like a wound. No one touched her. No one spoke. They simply watched as the wolfless girl who had been Gregor Thorne's daughter walked toward the massive oak doors at the far end of the hall. Behind her, the pack's howls faded into silence. The doors closed with a sound like thunder. And Elara Thorne, 18 years old, barefoot, wearing nothing but a thin dress and the knowledge that she was utterly alone, stepped into the Montana night and began to walk. The forest swallowed her within 100 yards. Ashwood Ridge territory sat in the western foothills of the Rocky Mountains, a landscape of dense pine and granite outcroppings, where the trees grew so close together that even in daylight the forest floor existed in a permanent twilight. At night it was a maze of shadows. Elara walked because stopping meant dying. Not from the quiet, though the October air bit through her dress and turned her breath to frost. Not from predators, though she could hear things moving in the undergrowth, drawn by the scent of a human alone and vulnerable, but from stillness, from the weight of silence, from the hollow place inside her where a wolf's voice should have been. Movement was the only prayer she had left. She walked east toward the sunrise she could not yet see, guided by the stars her grandfather had taught her to read before he died. Polaris, Cassiopeia, the belt of Orion. She had been 7 years old, small enough to sit in his lap while he pointed at the sky and told her the names of constellations in a voice like gravel and honey. A wolf can always find her way home, he had said, as long as she can see the stars. But Elara had no wolf, and she had no home, so she used the stars for the only thing left, a direction to walk that took her away from everything she had known. The first night she made it 6 miles. Her feet bled. The thin slippers she had worn to the rite of awakening ceremony fell apart within the first hour, the soles separating from the cloth uppers, and she had kicked them off and continued barefoot. The forest floor was a minefield of pine needles, sharp stones, and hidden roots. By the time the sky began to pale with pre-dawn light, the bottoms of her feet were raw meat. She stopped at a stream, knelt and drank until her stomach cramped. The water was ice melt cold enough to make her teeth ache, but it was clean and it was free, and it was hers. She tore strips from the hem of her dress and wrapped her feet, binding the wounds as best she could with trembling fingers. Then she kept walking. The second day was worse. Hunger set in a gnawing ache that started in her stomach and spread outward until her entire body felt hollow. She found wild raspberries, late-season stragglers clinging to thorny bushes in a sun-drenched clearing, and ate them, all seeds and stem, and the small bitter leaves, because she could not afford to waste anything. She knew how to forage. Her mother had taught her back when Elara Thorne had still been alive, back when the world had made sense. Herbalism, her mother had called it. The art of knowing which plants healed and which killed, which could be eaten, and which would twist your gut into knots. But knowledge and ability were different things when your hands were shaking and your vision kept blurring at the edges, and Elara found herself passing plants she recognized because she could not trust herself to identify them correctly. Better to go hungry than to die poisoned. The second night she slept beneath a fallen tree, curled into the hollow space where the roots had torn free from the earth. She did not build a fire. Fire meant smoke, and smoke meant attention, and she could not risk a patrol from Ashwood Ridge tracking her down before she crossed the border. She wrapped her arms around her knees, pressed her face against her torn dress, and tried not to think about the locket. The third day the mountains changed. The trees grew older, taller. Their trunks were wider than houses, ancient pines that had stood for 300 years, and the canopy closed overhead until the sky became a distant suggestion glimpsed through gaps in green. The air smelled different here, richer, wilder, thick with the scent of resin and running water, and something else, something she could not name, but felt in her bones. This was old territory, protected territory. The border between Ashwood Ridge and the Crown Lands was marked by a line of scorched oak trees that had been struck by lightning so many times they no longer grew leaves but stood like charcoal sentinels against the gray sky. Elara saw them in the distance, black silhouettes stark against the afternoon light, and something in her chest unclenched slightly. If she could reach those trees, she would be free of her father's reach. Gregor's authority ended at the border. Beyond it lay the domain of the Lycan King, and whatever happened to her, there could not be worse than what she had already survived. She was wrong about that, but she did not know it yet. Elara reached the scorched oaks as the sun touched the western horizon. She pressed her palm against the burned bark of the nearest tree, felt the rough char against her skin, and allowed herself one moment of relief. Then her legs gave out. She did not fall so much as fold her body, simply deciding it had done enough, had carried her as far as it could, and now it was shutting down, whether she wanted it to or not. She landed on her knees first, then her hands, then her side, curling into herself on the carpet of fallen pine needles. The world tilted. The edges of her vision went dark and then bright, and then dark again, and she tasted copper in her mouth. 3 days, 18 miles. No food except berries and stream water. Feet wrapped in bloody rags. Dress torn to threads. And now finally her body demanding payment for the will that had driven it past every reasonable limit. Elara closed her eyes. She thought about her mother, about the locket, about the words she would never see again. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered to the empty forest. "I tried." The darkness rose up and pulled her under. She woke to the sound of growling. Not the playful rumble of a dog or the warning snarl of a territorial animal, but the deep subsonic vibration of something massive and predatory standing very close to prey. It resonated in her chest, made her teeth ache, bypassed her conscious mind, and went straight to the most ancient part of her brain that knew with absolute certainty that she was about to die. Alara's eyes snapped open. 3 wolves stood over her. They were enormous, easily twice the size of any shifter she had ever seen in Ashwood Ridge, with coats the color of iron and storm clouds, and eyes that burned amber in the failing light. Their lips were pulled back from teeth the length of her fingers, and their attention was focused entirely on her, with the lazy precision of predators observing something that was not worth hunting, but might be worth killing anyway. She tried to move. Her body did not respond. 3 days of starvation and exposure had left her with nothing. No reserves, no strength, just a consciousness trapped inside a shell that could barely manage breathing. The largest wolf shifted. The sound was wet and violent. Bones cracking and reforming, vertebrae realigning with audible pops, muscles sliding beneath skin like tectonic plates rearranging themselves. Fur receded into flesh, limbs extended. And where the beast had been, a man now stood. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of build that came from a lifetime of physical labor or combat or both. His hair was dark cropped short on the sides, and his face was hard, all sharp angles and old scars. A jagged line bisected his left eyebrow, the pale tissue stark against tan skin. He wore the dark leather insignia of the Crown Guard, a wolf's head embossed on his shoulder, and when he looked down at Elara, his expression was flat and professional. "You're on sovereign ground," he said. His voice matched his face, rough and uncompromising. "State your name and pack." Elara opened her mouth. Her throat was so dry that the first sound that came out was more rasp than word. She swallowed, tried again. "Elara." The man's nostrils flared. He was scenting her, reading her biology like a page of text, and she knew exactly what he would find. No wolf signature, no pack bond markers, no alpha imprint, just human. Just skin and bone and exhaustion. "Pack," he repeated. "No pack." His eyes narrowed. "You're a rogue." "I'm exile." The distinction mattered. Rogues were wolves who had left their packs by choice, who had broken bonds and refused authority and lived outside the structure that held shifter society together. Exiles were different. Exiles had been thrown out, cast away, declared worthless and unwanted. The man studied her for a long moment. His 2 companions, still in wolf form, shifted their weight and looked at him with the kind of focused attention that suggested they were having a conversation she could not hear. Pack bonds, mental links, the 1,000 invisible threads that connected wolves to each other and left her always eternally on the outside. Finally, the man spoke. "You'll come with us. The king decides what happens to strays." Elara nodded. She did not have the strength to argue, and even if she had, where would she go? Behind her lay Ashwood Ridge and her father's rejection. Ahead lay the unknown. At least the unknown had not yet tried to kill her. The man gestured and one of the wolves stepped forward. It lowered itself until its shoulder was level with the ground, an invitation she did not understand until the man said, "Climb on, you won't make it on foot." Pride told her to refuse. Common sense told her she would be dead within an hour if she tried to walk. Common sense won. Elara dragged herself onto the wolf's back. Its fur was coarse and warm, and when it stood, she had to wrap her arms around its neck and press her face against its shoulder to keep from sliding off. The world swayed, her vision grayed at the edges. Then they were moving. The wolf ran with a gait that was surprisingly smooth, its massive body flowing through the forest like water around stones. The other 2 wolves flanked them, and the man kept pace in human form, his boots making no sound on the forest floor. They moved fast, faster than Elara had walked in 3 days, and the trees became a blur of green and shadow. She lost track of time, minutes or hours she could not tell. The motion of the wolf's stride rocked her like a ship on gentle waves, and the warmth of its body seeped into her frozen limbs, and the darkness that had tried to claim her before rose up again, softer this time, almost gentle. When she woke again, the trees had changed. They were descending into a valley, a long, gradual slope where the forest opened up and the canopy thinned enough to let in the last rays of the setting sun. The air was warmer here, and Elara could hear it before she saw it, the sound of a living city. Voices, laughter, the ring of a blacksmith's hammer, the creak of wagon wheels on cobblestone. And beneath it all, distant and mournful and achingly beautiful, the howl of a wolf singing to the rising moon. The wolf carrying her crested a ridge, and Elara saw it spread out below like something from a dream. Iron Peak, the seat of the lichen crown. It sprawled across the valley floor like something that had grown rather than been built, a city of stone and timber and iron that seemed to have erupted organically from the earth itself. Buildings rose in terraced levels, following the natural contours of the land, their walls draped in ivy and autumn vines. Cobblestone streets wound between them, lit by lanterns that burned with a pale blue flame, and everywhere she looked there were wolves. In human form, walking through markets and sitting in doorways and gathered around fire pits. In wolf form, padding silently through alleys or curled in sunlit patches. Young and old, male and female, a living tapestry of pack life that made Ashwood Ridge look like a ghost town in comparison. And at the center of it all, rising from the valley floor like a fist of black granite, stood the citadel. It was less a castle than a mountain that had been carved into rooms, its walls embedded with veins of silver ore that caught the moonlight and threw it back in fractured, glittering arcs. Towers rose from its corners, black spires crowned with blue flame, and its gates were tall enough to admit dragons, if dragons had been real. Elara's breath caught. She had never seen anything so beautiful or so terrifying. The wolf carried her through the gates without ceremony. Wolves in human form watched from doorways and market stalls, their eyes tracking her with the lazy precision of predators observing something that was not worth hunting. She felt their gazes on her skin like the prick of needles, reading her, dismissing her, cataloging her as insignificant. Inside the citadel, the air grew colder. Stone corridors swallowed sound. The man who had captured her led them through a maze of hallways where the walls were black obsidian, polished to a mirror shine, and firelight danced in wall-mounted braziers, and the ceiling disappeared into shadows too high to see. They stopped before massive doors twice the height of a man carved with wolves in various stages of hunt and battle and triumph. The man knocked once, a sound like a gunshot in the silence. The doors opened. "Wait here," the man said, and his voice was not unkind. "The king will decide." Then he was gone, and Elara was alone in a hall of polished stone, sitting on the floor because her legs would not hold her, staring at the flames that danced in their bronze holders and wondering what happened to exiles who trespassed on sovereign ground. She did not have to wonder long. The doors at the far end of the hall opened, and he entered like weather. That was the only way Elara could describe it. The way the air changed pressure, the way the firelight seemed to bend toward him, the way every molecule of oxygen suddenly felt charged with a current that made the fine hairs on her arms rise. The wolves flanking the hall dropped to one knee in a wave of synchronized movement, heads bowed, throats bared. The guard who had brought her pressed his fist to his chest and lowered his gaze to the floor. King Caelan Voss. He was not what she expected. The story she had heard in Ashwood Ridge painted the Lichen King as a monster, a creature of pure fury, 7 feet of muscle and malice, with eyes like molten gold, and a temper that had leveled entire packs. The propaganda of frightened alphas, she realized now, because the man walking toward her was something far more dangerous than a monster. He was beautiful, tall, impossibly tall, well over 6 feet, with a frame that was built for both war and grace. His hair was black, cut short at the sides and longer on top, and his jaw was sharp enough to cast shadows in the firelight. He wore no crown, no ceremonial robes, just a dark shirt with the sleeves pushed to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and laced with old scars. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. They were the color of raw amber, shot through with threads of gold that seemed to pulse with their own interior light, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that felt like standing too close to a bonfire. He stopped 3 paces from where she sat. The silence was absolute. Elara realized she should kneel. Every instinct, every rule of pack etiquette drilled into her since childhood screamed at her to drop, to submit, to make herself small. But her legs would not move. Her body, exhausted and starving, and held together by nothing but stubbornness, simply refused to fold. So she sat barefoot and bleeding, looking up at the Lichen King like an equal, which was either the bravest or the most suicidal thing she had ever done. His nostrils flared. She watched his pupils dilate, a rapid, involuntary expansion that she recognized from years of living among wolves. He was scenting her, and whatever he found made his entire body go rigid. Every muscle locked into place like a predator that had just spotted something it could not categorize. "Who are you?" His voice was deep, low, a resonance that she felt in her sternum. "Elara." She swallowed. Formerly of Ashwood Ridge. Formerly, the word was measured, tasted. Exiled. Yes. Why? She hesitated. The truth was a weapon that had been used against her so many times that speaking it felt like handing someone a knife and showing them exactly where to cut. But lying to a lichen king seemed like a faster path to death than honesty. I have no wolf, she said. A ripple moved through the hall, a collective inhale from the assembled wolves, a sound that carried the weight of judgment and revulsion. Wolfless. The word moved through the room like a contagion, landing on her skin with familiar weight. But the king did not react. His expression remained fixed, those amber eyes burning into her, with an intensity that was beginning to feel less like scrutiny and more like recognition. Do you have a mate? The question was so unexpected that Elara blinked. Of all the things she had anticipated, interrogation, imprisonment, execution, this was not among them. The hall seemed to hold its breath. She was acutely aware of every eye in the room, every ear tuned to her frequency, every wolf waiting for her answer, as though something monumental hinged on a single word. She swallowed. Her voice, when it came, was barely more than a breath. Not yet. The silence that followed was not empty. It was compressed, dense with something she could not name. A pressure that built in the space between her answer and his response, like the charged air before a lightning strike. Then King Caelan Voss did something that shocked every wolf in that hall. He snapped. Not outward, not with violence or rage, though both were clearly coiled inside him like a spring wound past its limit. His jaw clenched so hard she heard his teeth grind. His hands hanging at his sides curled into fists that blanched the knuckles white. A growl tore from his chest, deep, possessive, primal, and the amber in his eyes blazed to liquid gold as his wolf surged toward the surface. The wolves in the hall flinched. Several dropped lower, pressing themselves to the floor. The guard who had brought her took 2 involuntary steps backward. Elara stood perfectly still. She did not understand what was happening. She did not understand why the most powerful wolf in the known world was vibrating with barely contained fury over 3 quiet syllables spoken by a wolfless exile. But she understood with the bone-deep instinct that had kept her alive through 18 years of cruelty that something irreversible had just shifted. The king's eyes never left hers. His voice, when he finally spoke, was rough, scraped raw by the effort of keeping his wolf leashed. Not yet, he repeated, and in his mouth the words sounded like a vow. They gave her a room in the east wing of the citadel, not a dungeon cell, which was what she had expected, but an actual room with a bed and a window that overlooked the valley. Elara stood in the doorway and stared. The bed was massive, larger than anything she had ever seen in Ashwood Ridge, with a wooden frame carved from dark oak and a mattress thick enough to swallow her whole. Clean linens, ivory-colored and softer than anything she had touched in years, were folded at the foot. A basin of warm water sat on a cedar chest, steam rising in pale wisps. And on the windowsill, catching the last rays of moonlight, was a tray of food. Bread, roasted meat, a bowl of stew thick with root vegetables and herbs that made her mouth water so intensely it hurt. The guard who had escorted her, a different one, this time a woman with silver hair cropped short and a scar across her jaw, gestured to the room. You'll stay here tonight. Someone will come for you in the morning. Then she was gone, the door closing with a soft click that was somehow more unsettling than if it had been locked. Because unlocked meant trust, and trust was a concept so foreign to Elara's experience that she did not know what to do with it. She waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Listening for the sound of a key turning of a bolt sliding home, of the inevitable moment when the illusion of kindness would crack and reveal the cruelty beneath. It did not come. Elara crossed to the food. She ate all of it. She ate so quickly she barely tasted it, her body operating on pure survival instinct, shoving calories into the furnace before someone could take them away. Because someone always took them away. In Ashwood Ridge, food had been conditional, a reward for good behavior, or a punishment withheld, and the muscle memory of scarcity was written so deeply into her bones that even now, safe and alone, she could not eat slowly. The bread disappeared in 4 bites, the meat in 6. The stew she drank straight from the bowl, tipping it back until the last drops ran down her chin. Only when it was gone did she realize her hands were shaking. Not from hunger, that was being addressed, but from the aftershock of what had happened in the hall. The king's reaction, the way he had looked at her, the word that the assembled wolves had not spoken, but she had felt anyway, hanging in the air like smoke. Mate, Elara pressed her palms flat against her thighs, steadying herself. She knew what mate bonds were, had grown up hearing the stories, the legends, the sacred truth that every wolf carried inside them, like a compass pointing toward home. The moon goddess chose mates before they were born, wrote their destinies in the stars, and when two fated wolves met, the recognition was instant and absolute. Biology and magic and something beyond, both a pull so strong that denying it was like trying to stop breathing. But that required a wolf, and Elara had none. So whatever King Caelan Voss thought he had felt, whatever his wolf had recognized in that hall, it could not be the mate bond. It could not be. Because the bond required two wolves to complete the circuit, and she was a broken wire, a connection that led nowhere. She was wrong about that, but she would not understand why for weeks yet. Elara washed the blood from her feet in the basin of warm water, the clean cloth turning pink and then red as she scrubbed away 3 days of damage. The cuts were deep, some down to the muscle, and they would scar badly. She tore strips from the bottom of her already ruined dress and wrapped them carefully, binding the wounds with the precision her mother had taught her years ago. Elara Thorne had been an herbalist, a healer, a woman who understood the language of plants and bodies and the 1,000 ways that flesh could break and be mended. She had taught Elara everything she knew in the 7 years before she died. Lessons delivered in the quiet hours between dawn and breakfast when Gregor was still sleeping and the pack house was silent. "You'll need these skills," Mira had said once, her thin fingers wrapping a sprained wrist with practiced efficiency. "A wolf heals fast, but you, my darling, you will heal slow. So you must be careful, and you must be smart." Even then, Mira had known, had seen what Gregor refused to see. That Elara was different, that the wolf would never come. Elara finished bandaging her feet and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands in her lap. The room was warm, the bed was soft, the food sat heavy and comforting in her stomach. And for the first time in 3 days, she was not in immediate danger of dying. So why did she feel like she was waiting for the floor to collapse? Because safety, she had learned, was always temporary, a breath held between one blow and the next. And the kindness of strangers was the most dangerous thing of all, because it made you believe in something better, and belief led only to disappointment. She lay down on the bed fully clothed, her body sinking into the mattress, and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion finally pulled her under, into a sleep too deep for dreams. Morning came with a knock at the door. Elara startled awake, her heart hammering instincts, screaming danger before her conscious mind could catch up. The room was bright with sunlight, the window facing east, and she had slept through the entire night without waking once. That alone was a miracle. In Ashwood Ridge, she had trained herself to sleep lightly, to wake at the smallest sound because safety was measured in seconds, and she could not afford to be caught unaware. The knock came again, gentle, patient. "Come in," Elara said, her voice rough with sleep. The door opened and a woman entered, carrying a bundle of cloth draped over one arm. She was in her early 30s, built like a warrior with broad shoulders and the kind of lean muscle that came from a lifetime of combat training. Her hair was dark cut short in a style that was practical rather than decorative, and her face was striking in a way that had nothing to do with conventional beauty and everything to do with the scar that bisected her left eyebrow and the sharp intelligence in her gray eyes. "I'm Branwen," the woman said, "Beta of Iron Peak. The king asked me to see that you have what you need." She set the bundle on the bed. It unfolded into clean clothes, simple but well-made, a tunic and trousers and soft brown leather undergarments, and a pair of boots that looked like they would actually fit. "There's a bathing room down the hall," Branwen continued, her tone matter of fact. "Hot water, soap. Take your time. When you're ready, I'll take you to the council chamber." Elara's stomach dropped. "The council? The king has called a meeting. Your presence is required." It was not a request. Branwen left and Elara bathed in water so hot it turned her skin pink, scrubbing away 3 days of dirt and blood and the lingering smell of fear. The soap smelled like pine and something floral she could not name, and when she finally emerged from the water, she felt almost human again. The clothes fit perfectly. Someone had guessed her size with disturbing accuracy, and when she pulled on the boots, they molded to her bandaged feet like they had been made for her. She studied herself in the small mirror above the basin. The girl looking back was a stranger. Thinner than she remembered, all sharp edges and hollow cheeks with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of years of poor sleep. Her hair, dark brown and tangled from days without care, hung past her shoulders in a mess that no amount of finger combing could fix. But her eyes were the same, brown, deep and steady, with her mother's shape and her grandfather's determination. Elara touched the bare skin above her collarbone. The phantom weight of the locket was still there, a muscle memory her body had not yet learned to forget. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, a promise that she was seen even in darkness. She would get through this. She had survived 18 years under Gregor's rule. She could survive a council meeting. The council chamber was a circular room at the heart of the citadel, its walls carved with names. Elara could see them as Branwen led her inside, thousands of names etched into the black stone in a spiral that climbed from floor to ceiling. Like in King, she realized. Every ruler who had sat the throne since the founding, their names preserved in stone like a promise that they would not be forgotten. 12 elders sat in a crescent of high-backed chairs, their faces lined with age and authority. They wore robes in varying shades of gray and silver, and their eyes tracked Elara as she entered with the focused attention of predators evaluating prey. At the center, on a raised platform, sat Caelan. He was wearing the same dark shirt from the night before, his forearms bare. His posture relaxed in a way that somehow made him more intimidating rather than less. His eyes found hers the moment she entered the room, and the intensity of his gaze made her miss a step. Branwen touched her elbow, steadying her, and led her to a spot in the center of the floor directly in front of the king's platform. "The exile has no wolf," said a voice from the council. Elara's attention snapped to the speaker, a thin woman with white hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face all sharp angles and disapproval. Elder Marin, based on the gold insignia pinned to her robes. "Pack law is clear," Marin continued, her voice dry as kindling. "Wolfless individuals are not granted asylum in the Crown lands. She should be returned to the border." "She was exiled by her own Alpha," Branwen interjected, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "Returning her to the border is a death sentence. She has no territory, no pack, no protection." "That is not our concern," Marin replied, and the casual cruelty of it landed in Elara's chest like a fist. Caelan said nothing. He was watching Elara, and Elara, standing in the center of 12 people debating her right to exist, felt the walls closing in. She had been here before. Different room, different people, but the same fundamental truth. She was being judged, found wanting, dismissed, and she was so tired of it. "I asked for nothing," Elara said. The room shifted. 12 pairs of eyes locked onto her. "I ask for nothing," she repeated, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Not asylum, not protection, not a place in your pack. I ask only to pass through your lands unharmed and continue south. There are human settlements beyond the Grey March River. I will go there." The calculation happened in real time. She watched it move through the assembled elders, a subtle reorientation of attention. She had given them what they wanted, an easy exit, a wolfless girl who would remove herself from their world voluntarily. Several elders nodded with obvious relief, but Caelan's expression had changed. The controlled mask cracked, and beneath it, Elara saw something raw, something that looked like pain. "You would leave." It was not a question, it was an accusation wrapped in disbelief. Elara met his gaze. "I will not stay where I am unwanted. I have done that long enough." The silence was brutal. It stretched between them like a wire taut and humming, and Elara watched his jaw work, watched his hands grip the arms of his chair until the wood groaned. She thought she was being noble. She thought she was sparing him the burden of a wolfless mate, a political catastrophe, a biological impossibility, a bond that half the room would call a defect and the other half would call a curse. She thought in the broken logic of someone who had been told their entire life that they were worthless, that she was doing him a kindness. She was wrong, because what Caelan heard was not nobility. What he heard was the woman his wolf recognized as its other half, its completion, its home, telling him that she would rather walk into exile a second time than stay with him. He let her go. That was his mistake. His pride, his shock, his inability to articulate the volcanic upheaval happening inside his chest. All of it conspired to keep him silent. When he should have spoken, when he should have stood and said, "You are wanted. You are mine. Stay." Instead, he said, "Branwen, see that she has supplies for the journey." And Elara, her heart a closed fist behind her ribs, nodded once and left the council chamber. She had practiced this, the leaving. She had gotten very good at it. She made it as far as the southern gate before the world tilted on its axis. Branwen had been efficient, a pack of supplies, dried meat and hard bread, and a water skin. A warm cloak lined with fur, the boots she was already wearing, and a small pouch of coins, silver stamped with the Iron Peak wolf, enough to buy passage on a boat or a week's lodging in a human town. "Don't thank me," Branwen had said when Elara opened her mouth to speak. "I'm helping you make the worst decision of your life." Then she had turned and walked away, her jaws tight, her shoulders rigid with disapproval. Elara shouldered the pack and walked toward the southern gate, where the cobblestones gave way to a dirt road that wound through the lower valley toward the Grey March River. The morning sun was warm on her face, The city of Iron Peak hummed with life around her. And she was leaving it all behind because staying meant believing in something good, and she had learned long ago that belief led only to disappointment. She was maybe 200 paces beyond the gate when the scent hit her. It was not supposed to be possible. She was wolfless. Her senses were human limited, a candle where shifters carried a bonfire. But what reached her was not a smell so much as a feeling, a warmth that started in her chest and radiated outward. A vibration that resonated at a frequency she had never felt before, as though a tuning fork had been struck inside her rib cage and her entire body was ringing in response. She turned. Caelan was standing at the gate. He had not come quietly. Later, the guards would describe it in odd, nervous whispers. The king tearing through the citadel corridors, shoving past advisors and guards, his wolf so close to the surface that his eyes were solid gold and his voice had dropped into the subsonic register that made lesser wolves whimper. He had tracked her by scent which should have been impossible because she left no pack signature, no pheromone trail. But Caelan had followed some thread that existed between them at a level that transcended biology, and it had led him to the gate just as she was walking through it. He stood in the archway, chest heaving, hands braced against the stone walls on either side, as though he needed them to keep himself upright. His eyes were gold, fully gold. The amber was gone, replaced by a luminous, metallic intensity that was more wolf than man. "Don't," he said, a single word torn from somewhere deep. Elara's feet stopped moving. Her body responded to his voice before her mind could intervene, a full-body reaction that had nothing to do with alpha commands and everything to do with something far more ancient. "Don't what?" she whispered. "Don't walk away from me." He pushed off the wall, took a step toward her, then another. Each step seemed to cost him something. Pride, control. The careful architecture of a king who could not afford to be seen as anything other than invulnerable. "I have spent 6 years on this throne without a mate. 6 years of every pack in the realm parading their daughters before me, offering alliances and political marriages and wolves bred specifically to catch a king's eye. And I felt nothing, not a flicker, not a tremor." He stopped. The distance between them was maybe 10 feet, and the air in that gap was thick enough to drown in. "And then you walk into my hall barefoot and bleeding without even a wolf to carry the bond, and my entire world rearranges itself around you." Elara felt the tears before she could stop them. They were hot and sudden, and they betrayed her completely. These tears she had trained herself not to shed, falling now in the worst possible moment. "You don't want me," she said. The words were automatic, reflexive, pulled from the deep well of conditioning that her father's pack had drilled into her. "I am wolfless. I am nothing. Your council said—" "My council," he cut in, his voice a blade, "does not get to decide who the bond chooses. No one decides that. Not them, not me, not you." He closed the remaining distance. He was right in front of her now, close enough that she could see the pulse hammering in his throat, the way his hands were trembling at his sides. The Lycan King trembling because a wolfless girl was trying to walk out of his life. "I don't understand," Elara whispered. "Neither do I." He reached out, slowly giving her every opportunity to pull away. He lifted his hand and pressed his palm to the side of her face. The contact was like closing a circuit. She felt it everywhere. A rush of warmth and recognition, and something that went beyond language, beyond names, beyond the categories of wolf and wolfless that had defined her existence. It felt like coming home to a place she had never been, like remembering something she had never learned. "My wolf knows you," Caelan said quietly. "It has always known you. Before tonight, before you walked through that door, it knew. Like it was waiting." The revelation settled over Elara like a wave, not crashing, but rising. Slow, inexorable, filling every hollow place inside her. Mate, she was his mate. The wolfless daughter of a minor alpha, exiled and broken and carrying nothing but the memory of a crushed locket. She was the fated mate of the Lycan King. "I need time," she said. The words came from somewhere honest, somewhere beneath all the layers of damage and fear. "I have spent 18 years being told what I am. I need to learn who I am. I know." His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, catching a tear. "So do I." Behind them, the city of Iron Peak continued its morning rhythms. Merchants opening shops, wolves calling greetings to each other, the distant ring of the blacksmith's hammer. The world did not pause for revelations, but something in the space between two people shifted, quietly, irreversibly. Caelan reached into his pocket and withdrew something small, something that caught the morning light and threw it back in a warm bronze glint. Elara's breath stopped. It was a locket, not her mother's locket. That was gone destroyed a flat disc of metal in a distant hall. This one was new, smaller, the bronze polished to a soft glow, and the surface was engraved with a design she did not recognize at first, a crescent moon cradling a wolf silhouette. Branwen found a smith, Caelan said. I described the original. What the guards told me about the one your father destroyed. This isn't the same, it can't be. He hesitated and she saw the vulnerability in it, the uncertainty of a man who commanded armies but did not know if a gift would be welcome. The engraving is different, a moon and a wolf, because that's what we are. Elara took the locket. It was warm from his pocket. She turned it over in her fingers and found on the back an inscription so small she had to squint to read it. You are the moon. I will always see you. The tears came again and she did not fight them. She let them fall onto the locket, onto her hands, onto the dirt road where she had been about to walk into exile a second time. She cried in the quiet, thorough way of someone who was not breaking down, but breaking open, releasing something that had been held too tightly for too long. Caelan stood beside her. He did not try to stop the tears. He did not offer platitudes or solutions. He simply stayed, solid and present and unshakable, a fixed point in the spinning geography of her grief. When the tears subsided, Elara opened the locket. Inside the left panel was empty, a space waiting to be filled. The right panel held a tiny portrait painted on ivory so detailed it must have taken the artist hours. It was a wolf, not Caelan's wolf, massive and black and terrifying, a smaller wolf, silver-furred with eyes the color of dark amber. Whose wolf is this? She whispered. Yours, Caelan said. The way my wolf sees you, the way the bond sees you. He paused. You may not have a wolf that shifts, but you have one that lives in me. You've always had one. Elara closed the locket. She pressed it against the bare skin above her collarbone, the exact spot where her mother's had rested for 17 years, and felt it settle there like a key turning in a lock. She leaned into him, slowly, a deliberate, conscious choice. Not instinct, not biology, not the pull of a bond she could not verify through her own senses. A choice, her shoulder against his arm, her head tilting until it rested against the solid warmth of him. Caelan exhaled, a long, shaking breath, and his arm came around her with a tenderness that spoke of both strength and surrender. The sun climbed higher, the road south remained empty and untraveled, and Elara Thorne, who had walked away from everything she had ever known, made the decision to stay. Not because she had to, but because for the first time in her life someone had asked her to and meant it. The days that followed were the closest Elara had ever come to peace, and that was exactly why they terrified her. Caelan did not claim her publicly. He understood with an emotional intelligence that continually surprised her that the wolfless exile who had arrived barefoot at his gates was not ready for the spotlight of a royal mating announcement. Instead, he gave her space. A room in the east wing that remained hers, though the door connecting to his chambers stayed unlocked from both sides. Access to the Citadel library, which was vast and filled with texts on shifter history that she devoured like a person starving for context. A seat at meals where no one questioned her presence because Branwen had made it quietly and lethally clear that questions would not be tolerated. But intimacy was harder than logistics. Elara flinched when people touched her. She ate quickly, hunched over her plate, protecting her food with the instinct of someone who had gone hungry too many times. She woke before dawn every morning, hard hammering, certain that the room would be locked from the outside, that the food would be gone, that someone would come and tell her it had all been a mistake. Caelan noticed everything. He never mentioned it. Instead, he did small things. He brought her tea in the library, a wordless gesture, the cup placed at her elbow while she read his hand lingering near hers for a moment before he withdrew. He walked with her in the Citadel gardens, matching his pace to hers, talking about inconsequential things. The history of a particular rosebush, the name of a bird calling from the wall, as though he understood that she needed ordinary conversations before she could handle extraordinary ones. And slowly, in increments so small, they were almost invisible, Elara began to unfold. She laughed one afternoon, a real laugh startled out of her by something Branwen said about the Elder Council's collective inability to agree on lunch arrangements for an upcoming summit. The sound of it stopped Caelan mid-stride. He looked at her with an expression she could not decode, something between wonder and grief, as though her laughter was the most beautiful and most devastating sound he had ever heard. What? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing. His voice was rough. Just don't stop doing that. But the peace was fragile, and the fracture came from exactly where she should have expected it. The message arrived on the morning of the 12th day. Elara was in the library transcribing notes from a text on pack governance structures when Branwen appeared in the doorway. The beta's face was carefully neutral, but her jaw was tight, and her hand rested on the hilt of the blade at her hip, with the unconscious readiness of a warrior preparing for violence. "The king wants you in the council chamber," Branwen said. "Now." The walk through the citadel corridors felt longer than it should have. Elara's stomach twisted with a familiar dread, the kind that came from years of being summoned to her father's presence, and knowing that nothing good ever followed. She touched the locket at her throat, drawing comfort from the solid weight of it. "You are the moon. I will always see you." The council chamber was already full when they arrived. All 12 elders in their seats, their expressions ranging from concern to poorly concealed satisfaction. And standing in the center of the floor, dressed in formal black and flanked by 3 wolves in ceremonial armor, was a courier bearing the crest of Ashwood Ridge. Elara's blood turned to ice. Caelan sat on his throne, and when his eyes found hers, she saw the carefully controlled fury burning there. He gestured to a space beside the throne platform, an invitation rather than a command, and Elara moved to stand there on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The courier stepped forward and knelt, presenting a sealed scroll to Caelan with both hands. "A message from Alpha Gregor of Ashwood Ridge, Your Majesty, delivered under seal of continental law." Caelan took the scroll. The wax seal cracked like a gunshot in the silent room. He read in silence, and Elara watched the color drain from his face, replaced by something cold and white and infinitely more dangerous. When he finished, he handed the scroll to Elder Thaddeus, the neutral elder, who presided over council debates. Thaddeus read his white eyebrows, climbing toward his hairline, and then passed it to Elder Marin. "What does it say?" Elara asked. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Caelan looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw an apology for what he was about to confirm. "Your father is invoking the statute of bloodright." The words hit her like a physical blow. She knew that statute. Every wolf knew it, though it had not been used in living memory. An ancient law written in the 1st century after the packs unified under a single continental authority that gave an alpha unilateral control over all biological members of their pack, regardless of exile status, regardless of consent. "He's demanding your return," Caelan continued, his voice carefully controlled, "within 14 days. If the crown refuses, he will petition the Council of Alphas for a vote of no confidence in my adherence to traditional pack law." The room spun. Elara reached out, steadied herself against the edge of the throne platform. Elder Marin spoke, her dry voice cutting through the shocked silence. "The statute of bloodright has not been invoked in over 200 years, but it has never been formally repealed. If Ashwood Ridge takes this to the Council of Alphas, it becomes a question of legal precedent." "It becomes a question," Caelan said, and his quiet was more dangerous than other men shouting, "of whether this crown bows to a minor alpha's ego. The answer is no." "Your Majesty," Elder Thaddeus said carefully, "defying the statute puts you in direct conflict with a legal framework that holds the Continental Alliance together. There are 49 other alphas who will be watching how you handle this, many of them traditionalists who believe the old laws exist for a reason. Many of them," Branwen interjected, her voice sharp, "are also terrified that if you successfully challenge one ancient statute, you might start looking at others, like the ones that let them treat their pack members like property." Several elders shifted uncomfortably. Elara's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs, but the tremor would not stop. This was happening. Her father, 200 miles away, was reaching across the distance to drag her back into his control. And he was using the law itself as a weapon, turning the structure that was supposed to protect wolves against her. That night, alone in her room, she pressed her hand to the bare skin above her collarbone, where the new locket rested. The warmth of it was a small comfort against the cold certainty settling in her chest. Her father would not let her go, and if Caelan fought this battle, if he defied the statute and challenged the Council of Alphas, he would be risking his throne, his alliances, his entire political foundation. For her, for a wolfless girl who brought nothing but complications and danger. Elara looked out the window at the city of Iron Peak spread below the blue lanterns flickering like stars, and made a decision that she thought was noble. She would leave. Not south to human lands, but somewhere else. Somewhere far enough that Gregor could not reach her, and Caelan would not have to choose between his mate and his crown. It was the same broken logic that had driven her to walk away before. The belief that removing herself from the equation would solve the problem. That her absence would be a kindness. She was wrong, but she would not realize that until it was almost too late. She made it as far as packing a bag before Caelan found his room. The door between their rooms opened without a knock, and he stood in the doorway, still dressed in the formal attire from the council meeting, his hair disheveled as though he had been running his hands through it. "Don't," he said. Elara froze her hands, still holding the spare cloak she had been folding into the leather pack. I wasn't. Yes, you were. He crossed the room in 3 strides, took the pack from her hands and set it on the floor. You were going to leave. Again. She could not meet his eyes. If I'm gone, he has no leverage. The statute only applies if I'm here under your protection. And where exactly were you planning to go? What pack would take in a wolfless exile being hunted by her own father? What human settlement would be far enough that Gregor couldn't track you down? I don't know, she admitted. Somewhere, anywhere that isn't here where staying makes me a liability. Caelan's hands came up to frame her face, gentle but insistent, tilting her head until she had no choice but to look at him. You are not a liability, he said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. You are my mate, and I will burn every statute, every tradition, every alliance, if that's what it takes to keep you safe. You'll lose your throne. A throne without you means nothing. The words landed in her chest like stones thrown into still water, sending ripples outward that she could not contain. I won't let you sacrifice everything for me, Elara whispered. Then don't ask me to sacrifice you for everything else. He kissed her. It was not the gentle, careful touch she might have expected. It was desperate and grounding and fierce, a claiming that had nothing to do with dominance and everything to do with the bone-deep terror of almost losing something precious. His hands were in her hair, on her face, pulling her closer, and she responded with a ferocity that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caelan rested his forehead against hers. We fight this together, he said. Not you protecting me, not me protecting you. Together. Elara nodded, not trusting her voice. I need you to trust me, Caelan continued. I know that's asking for something you've never been able to afford, but I need you to believe that I will not let him take you. Not through law, not through force, not through any means he can devise. I'm trying, Abaim, Elara said. I'm trying to believe it. That's enough. For now, that's enough. He stayed with her that night, not in her bed, but in the chair beside it, keeping watch as though his presence alone could hold back the nightmares. And when Elara woke 3 times before dawn, gasping and disoriented, he was there each time, a quiet voice in the darkness, reminding her where she was and that she was safe. It was the first night she had not woken alone in as long as she could remember. The next morning brought an unexpected ally. Elara was breaking her fast in the small dining room off the main hall when the woman she did not recognize approached her table. She was tall, elegant, with the kind of beauty that came from excellent bone structure and absolute confidence in her own worth. Her blonde hair was pulled back in an intricate braid, and she wore the deep green colors of the Silverpine pack. You must be Elara, the woman said, her voice warm. I'm Liana. Alpha Gareth of Silverpine is my father. Elara set down her tea, suddenly wary. Silverpine was one of the traditionalist packs, one of the voices that would likely support Gregor's petition to the Council of Alphas. But Liana's smile was genuine, and when she gestured to the empty chair across the table, Elara nodded permission. I heard about the statute, Liana said, lowering her voice. My father is furious. Not at you, she added quickly, seeing Elara's expression. At Gregor. The statute of bloodright was supposed to protect pack members from external threats, not give alphas unlimited power over their own children. Your father is a traditionalist, Elara said carefully. Why would he oppose this? Because tradition and tyranny are not the same thing. Liana leaned forward. My father has 3 daughters. If the Council of Alphas upholds this statute, it sets a precedent that any alpha can invoke it for any reason. That our wolves, our choices, our futures belong to our fathers until they decide to release us. She paused, her green eyes intense. There are at least 6 other alphas who see it the same way. Wolves with daughters. Wolves with sons who might one day face an alpha using this law as a weapon. They won't support Gregor, but they need King Caelan to give them cover to oppose him publicly. Hope, dangerous and fragile, stirred in Elara's chest. What kind of cover? A legal challenge. Something that forces the Council of Alphas to debate the statute itself rather than just this specific case. If the question becomes, should this law exist at all, rather than does Gregor have the right to invoke it, then we have a chance. Elara's mind raced. She had spent the last week reading pack law in the library, devouring centuries of legal precedent and continental governance structures. She knew there was a process for challenging statutes, but it required time and political capital and the support of at least 12 alphas to bring a motion to the council floor. How many alphas would support a repeal vote? Elara asked. Right now, maybe 15. We need 25 to force a debate and 30 to pass a repeal. Liana's expression was grim. It's not enough, not yet. Branwen appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. The king wants to see you, both of you." In the council chamber, Caelan stood with a map spread across the table markers indicating packed territories across the continental lands. He looked up as he entered, and Elara saw the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. He had been awake all night planning. "Lyanna," he acknowledged, "your father sent word this morning. Silverpine will vote against upholding the statute." "He will," Lyanna confirmed, "and we've been discussing strategy. If we can build a case for repeal, we will." Caelan's voice was absolute. "I'm invoking the right of formal challenge. Any alpha who petitions under continental law can be challenged on the grounds of jurisdiction or standing. I'm arguing that Gregor lost jurisdiction when he formally exiled Elara." Elder Thaddeus, who had been standing quietly in the corner, spoke up. "That will buy you 30 days at most. The Council of Alphas will rule that exile does not sever blood right, and then you're back where you started. 30 days is enough to find 25 alphas and build the case for repeal." "And if you fail?" Elder Marin asked, her tone skeptical. Caelan's expression was carved from stone. "I won't." The days that followed were a blur of activity. Caelan sent messages to every alpha in the Continental Alliance, carefully worded arguments about why the Statute of Blood Right was a relic of a more brutal time. Branwen coordinated with sympathetic pack members across territories, building a network of wolves willing to share their stories privately, preparing for the day when testimony might be needed. And Elara, to her surprise, found herself at the center of the strategy sessions. Caelan insisted on it. "You understand this law in a way I never will," he said. "You've lived under its shadow. Your insight matters." So she sat in the war room with the king and his advisors, offering perspective on how alphas use the statute as a tool of control, identifying weaknesses in Gregor's petition, suggesting arguments that might sway traditional alphas toward reform. It was the first time in her life that her voice had mattered. The first time someone had asked for her opinion and actually listened to the answer. And slowly, without quite meaning to, Elara began to see herself differently. Not as a burden, not as a defect, but as someone with knowledge and insight earned through suffering and the strength to turn that suffering into something useful. On the evening of the 16th day, as she and Caelan reviewed legal documents in the library, he reached across the table and took her hand. "I need to tell you something," he said. Elara looked up from the page she had been annotating. "When my parents died," Caelan continued, his voice quiet, "it was because my father trusted the wrong person. His beta. A wolf he had known since childhood, who he believed was loyal beyond question. And that beta betrayed him for a promise of power from a rival pack." He paused, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. "I watched them die. I was 23, barely old enough to hold the throne, and I watched my father's most trusted friend drive a silver blade into his heart." Elara's breath caught. "I swore that day that I would never give anyone that kind of power over me again. That I would never let anyone close enough to hurt me the way my father was hurt. I built walls, made myself untouchable, ruled through strength and distance, in the belief that vulnerability was the same thing as weakness." His eyes met hers, and in them, she saw the raw honesty of a man laying himself bare. "And then you walked into my hall, and every wall I built crumbled, like they were made of sand." "Caelan, I'm terrified of losing you," he said simply. "I'm terrified that I won't be strong enough, or smart enough, or fast enough to keep you safe. And I'm terrified that one day you'll realize you deserve better than a king who doesn't know how to trust without fear." Elara stood, walked around the table, and pulled him to his feet. She framed his face with her hands the way he had done to her that night she had tried to leave. "I wake up every morning afraid this is a dream," she said. "I'm afraid my father will find a way to take me back. I'm afraid I'll never be enough for you, for this pack, for the role everyone expects me to fill." She took a breath. "But I'm here, and I'm choosing to stay. And I'm choosing to believe that we can be afraid together and still move forward." She kissed him. It was different from the desperate kiss in her room. This was deliberate, a promise made with lips and breath, and the conscious decision to trust someone with the most fragile parts of herself. When they finally pulled apart, Caelan rested his forehead against hers, and they stood like that for a long moment in the quiet library, two people learning how to be brave enough for love. The door connecting her room to his had been unlocked for weeks. That night, for the first time, Elara walked through it. Not for anything physical, just for the comfort of not being alone. She curled into the chair beside his bed while he reviewed more legal documents, and somewhere around midnight she fell asleep to the sound of pages turning and the certainty of his presence. When she woke before dawn, heart racing from a nightmare she could not remember, Caelan was already awake. He pulled her into the bed, held her against his chest, and talked about inconsequential things until her breathing steadied and the panic receded. "You're safe," he murmured into her hair. "I'm here, you're safe." And for the first time in 18 years, Elara believed it. On the morning of the 30th day, a formal summons arrived. The Council of Alphas would convene in Iron Peak in 3 days to hear arguments regarding the Statute of Bloodright. 50 alphas from across the continental lands, each bringing their own agenda and prejudices and political calculations. The future would be decided in a single vote. Caelan had managed to secure commitments from 22 alphas to vote for repeal. They needed 25 to force the debate and 30 to win. They were 8 votes short. "We're out of time," Branwen said, her frustration evident. 3 days is not enough to change 8 minds. But Elara was staring at the list of uncommitted alphas, her mind racing with the pattern she was seeing. 7 of them had one thing in common. They all had daughters of mating age. "What if," she said slowly, "we're making the wrong argument?" Caelan looked up from the war table. "What do you mean, Ati? We've been framing this as a question of individual rights, about whether wolves should have autonomy from their alphas. But these uncommitted alphas, they're traditionalists. They believe in hierarchy. Hierarchy. They believe alphas should have authority, and we stop arguing against that. We argue that the statute undermines alpha authority by setting a precedent that any alpha can override another alpha's decisions. If I'm in Iron Peak under your protection, and Gregor can invoke the statute to override your authority on your own land, then what's to stop another alpha from doing the same to them?" Liana, who had arrived that morning with her father, leaned forward. "You're suggesting we frame repeal as protecting alpha sovereignty rather than limiting it." "Exactly. The statute makes alphas vulnerable to interference from outside their territories. Repealing it actually strengthens their control within their own packs, not weakens it." The room went silent as the strategy settled in. Caelan looked at Elara with something close to awe. That might actually work. It took 2 days of frantic negotiation, carefully worded arguments sent to each uncommitted alpha private conversations, where Liana and other sympathetic wolves made the case for repeal using Elara's framework. By the evening before the council was set to convene, they had 32 confirmed votes. Enough to win. Elara stood on the battlements overlooking Iron Peak as the sun set, watching the contingents from 50 packs arrive below. Banners in every color, wolves in formal armor, alphas who held the fate of thousands in their hands. Tomorrow they would decide her future. Caelan found her there as the stars began to emerge. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "you are mine and I am yours. No law, no statute, no vote will change that." Elara turned to face him, the new locket warm against her skin. The man who had knelt before her and called her the moon standing solid and certain beside her. "Then we face it together," she said. And when he took her hand, she did not pull away. The moon rose over Iron Peak full and bright, and somewhere in Elara's chest, in the place where a wolf should have lived, something stirred. Not a shift, not a howl, not yet, but a warmth. A presence. A recognition faint as starlight. That she was not empty. She had never been empty. She had simply been waiting for someone who could see what was there. Tomorrow would bring the council. The vote. The reckoning with her father, and the law he had weaponized against her. But tonight, standing on the battlements with Caelan's hand in hers, Elara Thorne allowed herself to hope. And hope, she was learning, was not a weakness. It was the bravest thing she had ever done. The Grand Forum was built to hold 200 wolves comfortably. With 50 alphas and their delegations packed into the circular stone amphitheater, it felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Elara sat in the observer's gallery, technically not part of the proceedings with Branwen, a solid presence at her shoulder. Below, the 50 alphas sat in tiered rings descending toward the central floor, where Elder Thaddeus presided. Caelan sat in the first ring, not on a throne, but among his peers, a calculated statement of equality. And 3 rows back, flanked by 2 allied traditionalist alphas, sat Gregor Thorne. Elara had not seen her father in 33 days. The sight of him now hit her like a fist to the sternum. He looked smaller than she remembered, or perhaps she had simply grown taller in his absence. His iron gray hair was the same. His heavy brow, his brown eyes that found hers across the distance and held them with the cold assessment of a man evaluating property. She did not look away. "The Council of Alphas is convened." Elder Thaddeus announced, his voice carrying through the chamber. "We are here to address a petition from Alpha Gregor of Ashwood Ridge invoking the Statute of Bloodright. However, King Caelan Voss has invoked the right of formal challenge, questioning whether the statute itself should remain in force." A murmur moved through the assembled alphas. "The question before this council is not whether one alpha has the right to invoke an ancient law," Thaddeus continued, "but whether that law serves the interests of pack stability and continental unity in the modern age. He gestured to a wolf in formal robes who stepped forward with a stack of documents. Arguments for maintaining the statute will be heard first, followed by arguments for repeal. A vote will follow. 25 votes are required to force formal debate. 30 votes are required to pass repeal. Alpha Gareth of Silverpine stood first. He was a large man, traditionalist to his core, and when he spoke, Elara's heart sank. The Statute of Bloodright has stood for 4 centuries, Gareth said. It is the foundation of Alpha authority. Without it, we invite chaos, wolves questioning their alphas, packs fragmenting. The very structure that has kept us unified since the founding, crumbling, because we have grown soft. He sat. 3 other traditionalist alphas spoke in support their arguments, variations on the same theme tradition, authority, the sanctity of pack hierarchy. Then Caelan stood. I am not here to argue against tradition, he said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. Tradition has its place. Tradition gives us roots. But tradition is not the same as law, and law is not the same as justice. He paused, letting the words settle. The Statute of Bloodright was written in an era when alphas were warlords defending their territories from external threats. It gave them the power to recall their wolves from danger, to protect their packs from enemies who might use stolen members as leverage. That was its purpose. Protection. Caelan's eyes swept the chamber. But tell me this, if Alpha Gregor can invoke the statute to override my authority on my own land, to claim a wolf I have granted sanctuary, what stops another Alpha from doing the same to you? If this statute stands, then every Alpha in this chamber is vulnerable to having their decisions overruled by any other Alpha who shares a blood tie with one of their pack members. The chamber shifted. Elara saw the calculation happen in real-time Alphas who had been leaning toward tradition, suddenly reconsidering. This is not about individual rights, Caelan continued. This is about whether you want to maintain your sovereignty within your own territories or whether you want to live in a world where any Alpha can reach across borders and undermine your authority with a single petition. He sat. The silence was profound. Then Alpha Gareth stood again. Elara held her breath. I came here to defend this statute, Gareth said slowly. I have 3 daughters. I believed that a father's authority over his children was absolute and necessary. But King Caelan has raised a point I had not considered. He turned to face Gregor directly. If the statute allows Alpha Gregor to override King Caelan's sanctuary on Crown lands, then it allows any Alpha to override my authority in Silverpine. That is not tradition. That is vulnerability. He paused. I vote to repeal. The chamber erupted. Elara's hands gripped the railing of the observers' gallery as Alpha after Alpha stood to speak. Some in support of repeal, citing Caelan's sovereignty argument. Others opposed clinging to the old ways. And then, unexpectedly, a small Omega woman stood in the petitioner's gallery. I request permission to testify, she said, her voice trembling but clear. Elder Thaddeus frowned. This is a debate among Alphas. She speaks for those who bear the cost of your laws, Caelan interrupted. I move that we hear her. A vote. 27 Alphas supported hearing testimony. The Omega woman descended to the floor. She was young, maybe 25, with scars on her wrists that suggested restraints. My name is Mira, she said, of the Blackwater Pack. 5 years ago, my Alpha invoked the Statute of Bloodright to force my return from a neighboring pack where I had found my fated mate. He used the law to dissolve my bond and sell me into a political mating with an Alpha twice my age. Her voice cracked, but she continued. The statute says an Alpha has absolute authority over biological pack members. It does not say that authority must be just. It does not say it must be kind. It only says it is absolute. She looked up at the assembled Alphas. I am not asking for your pity. I am asking you to recognize that a law without limits is a weapon in the hands of those who would abuse it. She sat. 3 more Omegas came forward. Then a young male wolf who had been sold to settle a debt. Then another, and another. Gregor stood, his face flushed with anger. This is theater, these wolves are the consequence of the law you invoked, Caelan cut in his voice like steel. Every testimony you just heard is a direct result of the statute you want this council to uphold. Elder Thaddeus called for order. We will vote, he announced. All in favor of repealing the Statute of Bloodright signify by standing. Elara counted. 10 Alphas stood immediately, then 5 more. Then another cluster. The tally climbed 15, 20, 25. The threshold to force formal debate had been met, but they needed 30 to win. 26, 27, 28. Alpha Thorne of Blackwater stood, his face grim. I vote repeal. I did not know my own pack member had been abused under this law. That ends today. 29. One more. They needed one more. An older alpha in the back row from a small pack Elara did not recognize stood slowly. I have no daughters, he said. I have no sons. But I remember when my own father used this statute to control me, to chain me to a pack I hated. I swore I would never be like him. I vote repeal. 30. The chamber exploded into sound. The statute of blood right is hereby repealed by vote of the Continental Council of Alphas, Elder Thaddeus declared over the noise. Effective immediately, no alpha may invoke blood right to override another alpha's sanctuary or to compel the return of an exiled member. Elara's knees buckled. Branwen caught her elbow, steadying her. Gregor rose from his seat, his face twisted with fury. He pointed at Elara. This is not over. She is still my... She is nothing to you, Caelan said, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. You declared her dead to you. You exiled her from your pack. You destroyed her mother's locket and cast her into the wilderness to die. He descended from his seat, and every alpha in the chamber watched as the Lycan King crossed the floor to stand before Gregor Thorne. You have no claim. You have no authority. And if you ever speak her name again, I will invoke my right as Lycan King to challenge you directly for the abuse of pack law. It was not an idle threat. A king's challenge was binding and to the death. Gregor's face went white. The council is dismissed, Elder Thaddeus said quickly. All votes are recorded and binding. The alphas began to file out, but Elara barely noticed. She was watching her father, watching the moment he realized he had lost everything. His daughter, his legal claim, his political leverage. Gregor met her eyes one last time across the distance. And Elara, sitting in the observer's gallery with Branwen beside her and 30 alphas who had just voted that she mattered, did not look away. She was the moon, and she had always been seen. That evening, the Great Hall was transformed. Where the council had met intense political debate tonight, there was celebration. The repeal of the statute had freed not just Elara, but dozens of wolves across the continental packs who had lived under threat of being recalled by abusive alphas. Branwen had insisted Elara wear formal attire. The dress was deep blue, the color of midnight, with silver embroidery that caught the light like stars. It fit perfectly, and when Elara studied herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back. She was still thin, still carried the shadows under her eyes. But there was something different now. A straightness to her spine, a steadiness in her gaze. She looked like someone who had survived. Ready? Branwen asked from the doorway. Elara touched the locket at her throat. Ready. The Great Hall fell silent when she entered. 300 Wolves alphas and pack members and visiting delegations all turned to watch as Elara Thorne walked across the polished obsidian floor toward the raised platform where Caelan waited. He was dressed in formal black, the crown of Iron Peak resting on his dark hair for the first time since she had met him. He looked every inch a king, powerful, untouchable, beautiful. And when his eyes found hers, they softened with something that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with the man beneath the crown. Elara climbed the 3 steps to the platform. Caelan descended to meet her, and in front of 300 witnesses, the Lycan King dropped to one knee. The hall gasped. Elara Thorne, Caelan said, his voice carrying through the absolute silence. I kneel before you not as a king claiming property, but as a man asking a question. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a silver collar, delicate and engraved with words she could not read from this angle. Will you be my mate? Not because a bond demands it, not because tradition requires it, but because you choose it. Because I choose you and you choose me, and we build something together that belongs to no one but us. Elara's vision blurred with tears. The collar says equals in all things, Caelan continued quietly. That is what I offer you. Not a crown, not a title, just partnership, just us. Elara sank to her knees in front of him, so they were eye to eye equal on the floor of the Great Hall. Yes, she whispered. Then louder so the hall could hear, yes. Caelan's hands shook as he fastened the silver collar around her throat. It was warm against her skin, a perfect weight, and when it clicked into place, something in Elara's chest resonated like a bell being struck. The warmth she had felt before, faint and distant, surged. For a heartbeat, she felt it. A presence in her mind that was not her own thoughts. A consciousness vast and wild and utterly devoted. There you are, it seemed to say. I have been waiting, Elara gasped. Caelan, his eyes widened. You felt that. I felt... She pressed her hand to her chest. Something. I felt something. He pulled her to her feet and they stood together on the platform as the hall erupted into howls of celebration. But Elara barely heard it. She was focused on the warmth in her chest, the presence that was there and gone like starlight glimpsed through clouds. Not a full shift, not a wolf she could call forth, but proof undeniable and precious that she was not empty. She had never been empty. Her wolf had simply been waiting for her to be ready to see it. Caelan placed a matching silver band on his own wrist, engraved with the same words equals in all things. And when he kissed her, the hall's howls crescendoed into something joyful and wild, a pack of celebrating not just a mating, but a victory over a law that had hurt too many for too long. Spring came to Iron Peak with an explosion of green. Elara stood in the new Omega Wellness Center, watching as 12 young Omegas practiced reading strategy maps with Branwen. The building had been her idea, funded by silver from Caelan's personal treasury, and built on the southern edge of the Citadel grounds. It was not a shelter, it was a school, a place where Omegas could learn strategy, governance, healing, map-making, all the skills that would let them lead rather than simply follow. 23 Omegas had sought sanctuary in Iron Peak since the statute's repeal. Not all stayed, but those who did were thriving. Luna Elara, one of the young Omegas, a girl named Kira, held up a map. Is this the correct route for the supply chain? Elara studied it, made 2 small corrections, and handed it back. Perfect. Now calculate the cost differential if we reroute through Silverpine instead of Blackwater. She no longer flinched when people called her Luna. It had taken months, but the title had settled on her shoulders like the silver collar, a perfect weight earned rather than given. Branwen caught her eye and gestured to the door. He's looking for you. Elara found Caelan in the war room, bent over a letter with Elder Thaddeus. The Continental Council wants you to speak at the next summit, Thaddeus was saying, about governance reform, and he noticed Elara. Luna, we were just discussing. I'll do it, Elara interrupted. Both men stared at her. The summit, she clarified. I'll speak. If they want to hear about reform, they should hear it from someone who lived under the old system. Caelan's expression shifted to something that looked like pride. You're certain? I am. Thaddeus nodded. I'll send confirmation. He gathered his documents and left, closing the door behind him. Caelan crossed to Elara and pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her waist. How were the students? He asked. Brilliant. Kira mapped an entire supply chain revision. Takes after her teacher. Elara leaned into him, comfortable in a way that still sometimes surprised her. 6 months of waking up safe. 6 months of meals that no one took away. 6 months of learning that trust was not a weapon people used against you. I had a letter from Seren, she said. Caelan's arms tightened fractionally. Elara's sister had written 3 months ago a tentative reach across the distance in damage. The letters had continued, slowly building a bridge. She wants to visit, Elara continued. She's been appointed Alpha of Ashwood Ridge. Grigor stepped down. Voluntarily. The pack forced him. Too many members requested transfers after the council vote. He had no support left. Good. They stood like that for a moment, Elara's back against Caelan's chest, his chin resting on her head, looking out the window at Iron Peak Valley below. Do you regret it? Caelan asked quietly. Staying calm, taking this on. Elara thought about the question seriously. The Luna's role was not ceremonial. She attended council meetings, mediated disputes, managed the wellness center, and 6 other initiatives for pack reform. It was exhausting. It was fulfilling. It was hers. No, she said, I don't regret it. Good. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Because I need you to know something. She turned in his arms to face him. I have loved you since the moment you refused to kneel in that hall, he said. Before I knew your name, before I knew what the bond was, I looked at you broken and bleeding and utterly unbowed, and I thought, this is the strongest person I have ever seen. Elara's throat tightened. I love you, Caelan continued. Not because the bond chose you, but because you are brilliant and brave, and you laugh at Branwen's terrible jokes, and you fight for wolves who have no one else to fight for them. I love you too, Elara whispered, even though you bring me tea when I don't ask for it, and you worry too much, and you still haven't learned that I can carry my own bags. He laughed, and the sound was warm and real and home. That evening, they stood on the battlements as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The city spread below, blue lanterns beginning to flicker to life, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Elara felt the warmth in her chest respond, stronger than before, more present, almost like a voice, though she could not make out words yet. Soon it seemed to whisper. Soon. Caelan noticed. Your wolf? She's waking up, Elara said. Slowly, but she's there. She always was. The moon rose full and bright and impossibly close. Elara touched the locket at her throat with one hand, the silver collar with the other. Two weights, two promises, two pieces of metal that meant she was seen and chosen and valued. "Tell them not yet," she said. Caelan smiled, understanding immediately. Not yet, but almost. Almost. The word hung between them like a vow. Below, the city of Iron Peak hummed with life. The Omega Wellness Center's lights glowed warm. The citadel stood solid and ancient. And two people who had found each other, against all odds, stood together and watched their world turn golden in the fading light. Elara Thorne, who had once been called Worthless, was now called Luna. And she had learned that the most powerful thing a person could do was not to be perfect, or to never break, or to hide their scars. It was to survive, to choose, to hope, and to believe against all evidence to the contrary that they deserved to be seen. She was the moon, and she would always, always be seen.